She was brought in as the show's savior, beautiful, talented, the perfect fit for primetime TV. But what happened behind the cameras was anything but glamorous. Cheryl Ladd didn't just clash with a co-star, she was dragged into a psychological battlefield that nearly crushed her spirit. And to this day, she has never spoken to that co-star again. Why? What pushed her to cut off all ties, permanently? This isn't just a story about drama on set. It's a story of betrayal, power struggles, and the emotional scars that never fully healed. And once you hear what really happened, you'll understand why silence was Cheryl Ladd's loudest statement. Stay with us, because the truth will shock you. Before Cheryl Ladd became a household name, her road to fame was paved with rejection, uncertainty, and years of being overlooked. She wasn't born into Hollywood privilege, and her rise didn't happen overnight. In fact, she didn't even start as an actress, she began behind the scenes, using her voice to bring animated characters to life. Few fans know that in the early 1970s, Cheryl was the singing voice of Melody on Josie and the Pussycats, a role that paid the bills but offered little in the way of recognition or prestige. She spent years hustling, bouncing from guest roles to low-budget productions, taking anything she could just to stay afloat. It was a grind, and for Cheryl, every passing year felt like time slipping away. She had the beauty, she had the talent, but the industry kept moving past her, offering flashes of hope that never quite turned into breakthroughs. Hollywood was harsh, competitive, and unforgiving, and Cheryl Ladd was determined to survive it. Her story wasn't just about ambition, it was about resilience in the face of a system that almost broke her before she ever had the chance to shine. Friends say Cheryl Ladd was on the verge of giving up. After years of struggle and near misses, she had begun to accept that maybe stardom just wasn't in the cards for her. But then came the call, a single phone call that would change everything. On the other end was Charlie's Angels, one of the biggest shows on television at the time. The series had skyrocketed to fame, but behind the scenes, chaos had taken hold. Farrah Fawcett, the show's golden girl and America's sweetheart, had shocked everyone by walking away after just one season. The network was desperate, and the producers were scrambling to find a replacement who could somehow capture the audience's attention without trying to imitate the irreplaceable Farrah. That's when they turned to Cheryl Ladd. She wasn't asked to replace Farrah's character, instead, she would be introduced as her younger sister, a strategic move to maintain the show's storyline continuity without erasing what Farrah had built. But make no mistake, it was a massive gamble. Cheryl was stepping into a spotlight already scorched by fan obsession and media scrutiny. The pressure was overwhelming from day one. Viewers were skeptical, critics were circling, and the expectations were almost impossible to meet. Cheryl Ladd wasn't just taking on a role, she was walking into a storm, tasked with saving a franchise that was already showing signs of cracking. And no one could have predicted what would happen next. Not everyone on set embraced her, and the media was unrelenting, but Cheryl handled it gracefully. She arrived on time, smiled during interviews, and gave her lines with ease. Ratings stayed high as viewers gradually came to accept her. It appeared to be a success story on the surface. However, a much darker scenario was beginning to emerge behind the scenes. The emotional burden that Cheryl endured in quiet was something that many people were unaware of. There was a tinge of discomfort in every smile. Each sequence that was filmed was an additional endurance test. Because it would be much more difficult for Cheryl to blend in with the cast than to win over the audience. The energy changed as soon as Cheryl stepped onto the stage. Cheryl was perceived by some as an outsider, attempting to fill shoes that no one wanted replaced, despite her professionalism and charisma. Farrah Fawcett's departure had left a noticeable void. Although she was warmly received by the producers, not everyone on set was as excited. At first, there was no loud or dramatic tension. It was subtly done. A rapid walk past her in the hallway without even saying hello, a chilly look, and a missing grin. Always polite in public, Cheryl subsequently acknowledged that her first few days on Charlie's Angels seemed more like treading carefully than becoming a sisterhood. Among the initial trio, one co-star in particular appeared particularly aloof. Members of the crew started chatting about the cold air. Cheryl frequently received brief responses or courteous nods in response to her attempts at informal conversation. Cheryl sat by herself with her screenplay between breaks, while the other angels crowded together. Others detected something more profound, a subliminal resistance to accepting her, while others dismissed it as the strain of a high-pressure performance. And it wasn't just the cast. There were repercussions. Some crew members adopted the stance taken by the more well-known celebrities. Perhaps without realizing it, they mimicked Cheryl's exclusionary behavior. Cheryl seems to have been positioned on the outside of an imaginary line that had been drawn. Cheryl, however, was determined not to let it depress her. She continued to appear. She was able to memorize her lines. When scenes went over, she stayed late. In the hopes that it might gradually melt the ice, she brought kindness to the set. It has nothing to do with ego. Cheryl didn't want to be the best. All she wanted was to perform her duties and contribute to something worthwhile. However, despite her best efforts, one individual flatly refused to let her in. And every week that went by, Cheryl felt it more and more. The long hours, the lack of communication, and the mounting realization that she would never be treated as an equal and would always be viewed as a replacement, regardless of how well she worked. And before long, that subdued tension would explode into something that was impossible to ignore. Kate Jackson was the source of the cold environment Cheryl Ladd encountered. Kate was regarded as the serious angel at the time. She had a strong creative voice behind the scenes and had contributed to the show's tone. However, intensity accompanied that influence. Additionally, Kate did not conceal her disapproval when Cheryl took center stage. Several set accounts state that Kate had publicly questioned Cheryl's selection, purportedly calling her a mere blonde Barbie doll. Not only did the words hurt, but the person who said them did as well. This wasn't small talk. Insiders continue to discuss the conflict between the two women decades later. Furthermore, personality was not the only factor. According to reports, Kate thought Cheryl's casting was a step toward style rather than depth and that the show had begun to lose its substance. Fair or not, it put up an imperceptible barrier between them that only got higher over time. Eye rolls and snide remarks were the first things that happened. Kate would ignore or interrupt Cheryl when she made recommendations during rehearsals. Kate allegedly avoided eye contact during table reads. According to one crew member, the atmosphere was so chilly that you could see your breath. Cheryl remained silent, though. She wasn't there to create enemies since she thought the work should speak for itself. The third angel, Jacqueline Smith, was frequently caught in the midst. Even though she was friendly with both ladies, she could not help but notice the change in vibe when Cheryl and Kate were together. Cheryl eventually gave up attempting to make a connection. She remained professional, kept her distance, and concentrated on her scenes. However, bitterness tends to persist. It was evident that there was something developing beneath the surface. It appeared to be a power battle to those on the sidelines. The emotional center of the play has always been Kate. Even if it wasn't deliberate, Cheryl's entrance upset that equilibrium. Not everyone was prepared to adapt to the show's changes. Then came the day when everything came to a head. Cheryl Ladd was able to keep her head down and steer out of confrontation for a while. However, tension between her and Kate Jackson was at an all-time high, and even the calmest waters can conceal powerful undercurrents. The last straw was an episode that needed more practice time during production. Producers had urged Cheryl to take on a more central emotional arc and a few more lines after the script had undergone several rewrites. She was thrilled. It was an opportunity to establish herself as a genuine actress with substance, not just the new chick. But Kate had a different perspective. Several stories claim that she was incensed by the modifications. She thought that the writers were moving the focus in a way that felt betraying her, favoring Cheryl at her expense. Kate is said to have slammed down the final draft of the script and hurried off set when it was distributed. One of the most talked about events in the show's backstage history would be what transpired next. In a dressing room, Kate confronted Cheryl in private. They raised their voices. Crew members close to the scene reported hearing shouting, a door bang, and then stillness, though the precise words were never made public. Cheryl left a few minutes later, her eyes crimson and her body clearly frightened. For the remainder of the day, she did not come back. She had never stepped off the set before. The producers were rushing. Despite having a successful performance, their cast was disintegrating. An effort was made to mend the situation. There were meetings. An apology was offered, but Cheryl didn't want to get into another argument. She had had enough of attempting to appease someone who obviously did not desire peace. She didn't talk to Kate at all after that incident, unless they were filming a scene. Even experienced crew members found the shift shocking. Although the tension had always existed, it was now indisputable. Silent vehicle trips to promotional events, icy glares in between takes, and a backstage environment that resembled a courtroom more than a movie set. From the outside, nothing appeared to have changed. As usual, the episodes were broadcast. Insiders sensed something had changed, but the smiles remained. Cheryl had made up her decision, and what had been a quiet tension had become blatant animosity. She would be polite on camera, complete the season, and put in the work. However, any relationship with her co-star would end when the cameras stopped rolling, and for Cheryl, that choice would be permanent. Cheryl Ladd had the option to go public following the behind-the-scenes explosion. She had the opportunity to defend herself, give her side of the story, and draw attention to the abuse she received, but she chose not to. Rather, she opted for quiet. And that quiet grew louder than any headline from a tabloid. Cheryl continued to be the epitome of professionalism for the rest of her tenure on Charlie's Angels. She kept her emotions off camera, knew her lines, and showed up. However, she vanished from anything that required her to be in the same room with Kate Jackson after filming was finished. She skipped some of the cast photo shoots. In order to prevent Cheryl from attending some events, producers had to ensure that the two were seated apart. Fans detected anything odd in the early 2000s. In honor of the show's legacy, a number of former cast members got back together for tributes and interviews. But there was no sign of Cheryl. Her team provided evasive responses when questioned about scheduling issues, but insiders had other ideas. Cheryl didn't want to sit next to someone who had spent years making her feel inferior and unwanted. It was no accident that she was not there. It was a declaration. The tabloid started to conjecture. A long-standing feud was rekindled. According to some, it was never truly settled. Others thought Cheryl was merely defending herself out of self-respect rather than retaliation. In any case, admirers started to piece it together. Cheryl was obviously still feeling the effects of what had transpired. There was one thing she would never do, even though she had moved on with her life and profession. Act as though it never occurred. Even after several decades, she still had a close relationship with Jacqueline Smith. The two continued to communicate, made appearances together at charity functions, and occasionally shared fond public recollections of the show. However, Cheryl's tone would change when Kate Jackson's name was mentioned in interviews. Her co-star was never disparaged by her. She never stoked controversy, but she also never backed down. Her consistency was what made it even more remarkable. Cheryl remained silent as other Hollywood feuds erupted and subsided over the years. She never denied that there had been hurt, but she did not encourage rumors. Her avoidance of certain subjects demonstrated that there was still sorrow beneath the surface, and it was obvious that something had happened that had crossed a boundary for her that could never be uncrossed. Initially, fans were too engrossed in the thrilling episodes to realize that something was amiss. Glossy network ads, high-stakes cases, and glitzy costumes served their purpose. However, as the seasons progressed, even casual viewers began to feel that something was wrong, particularly with Kate Jackson and Cheryl Ladd. Watchers with keen eyes started to read their body language. Situations in which their characters were awkwardly separated. There were times when one angel would talk and the other would hardly respond. There was a lot of conjecture in online forums, particularly in the early days of fan message boards. While some fans felt the truth was brewing just beneath the surface, others thought the characters were just scripted that way. Interviews followed. Cheryl took the time to reflect on her career in the early 2000s. In an obvious attempt to stir things up, the interviewer inquired as to whether she remained in contact with any of her former angels. "And what about Kate Jackson?" was asked after Cheryl grinned and spoke kindly of Jacqueline Smith. "No," was her one-word response. No elaboration, no explanation, just a firm, cool no. More than a 5-minute diatribe ever could, to be sure. Fans realized there was more to the tale after that. The clip was picked up by entertainment bloggers, and the headlines started to appear. Feud is still alive. Cheryl Ladd declines to get back in touch with her co-star. Theories exploded in the comment areas. Nearly everyone agreed, while some defended Cheryl and some attempted to speculate as to what had transpired. They didn't imagine the distance. It was still there and it was real. It was more fascinating because of Cheryl's meticulous handling of the subject. She never gave Kate a phony grin, but she also never openly insulted her. Even if it was slight, her honesty simply added to the mystery. Why, after all these years, was the wound still open? What specifically had transpired to prevent reconciliation? Viewers started rewatching previous episodes from a new perspective. They saw every look, every tense conversation, every chilly shoulder. And it becomes more difficult to ignore the reality every time Cheryl was questioned about the performance and responded with the same calm, aloof demeanor. And just when fans believed they had heard everything, some surprising details about Kate Jackson's background began to come to light. At the same time as Cheryl Ladd kept her distance and her dignity, Kate Jackson took a different technique. Silence, however, of some other type. Through the years, she gave few interviews. And while she did, she nearly by no means spoke about Charlie's Angels. It changed into as if that bankruptcy of her lifestyles had been sealed shut, locked at the back of unstated regrets and unresolved tension. The ones near Kate have quietly recommended that her time at the display become no longer pretty much clashing personalities. She were under mammoth personal strain. Backstage, she battled serious fitness issues, together with a prognosis that would cause more than one surgical procedures. On top of that, she became reportedly pissed off with the direction the show was taking. Kate had usually envisioned Charlie's Angels as extra than just style and combat scenes. She wanted substance, drama, actual performing challenges. But because the show leaned in addition into glamour, she felt her influence slipping away. A few agree with that frustration spilled over into her running relationships. That the coldness Cheryl experienced might not were entirely personal, but as a substitute the result of Kate's growing disillusionment with the enterprise and herself. She was managing extra than just a new co-megastar. She turned into grappling with burnout, disappointment, and physical pain. And lamentably, Cheryl might also have turned out to be the goal of that out-of-place anger. Still, despite that context, Kate in no way made amends. She in no way addressed the feud publicly, by no means presented readability or closure. In a single uncommon interview from the overdue 90s, whilst asked if she stayed in contact with her former co-stars, she laughed and stated, "No, I have moved on. That become a long time ago." It changed into a deflection, and one which left enthusiasts with greater questions than answers. There had been no apologies, no acknowledgments, and no attempts at a quiet, private reconciliation both. For Cheryl, that silence might also have been the very last confirmation that nothing had changed and never would. Whether or not it become pleasure, ache, or certainly a desire to forget, Kate's silence became its very own announcement. And for Cheryl, that silence possibly felt like affirmation that the past could never be recounted, let alone repaired. Something sympathy Kate would possibly have earned through her personal struggles, one thing turned into clear. The bridge between her and Cheryl turned into no longer simply damaged. It had been burned. As the years passed, Cheryl Ladd built an existence a long way removed from the drama of Charlie's Angels. She went on to megastar in dozens of TV movies, launched song albums, or even published books. Her personal lifestyles flourished as properly. She married, raised a circle of relatives, and embraced her role as a public figure with grace and heat. To many, she had become a symbol of quiet resilience, someone who had persisted the harsh highlight of Hollywood without letting it harden her. But one component never modified. Cheryl Ladd in no way made peace with Kate Jackson. She never sought reconciliation and in no way time-honored it if it turned into offered. Enterprise insiders say Cheryl has turned down numerous possibilities through the years to reunite with the authentic Solid, particularly if it concerns sitting across from Kate. It became now not about bitterness. It turned into approximately boundaries. When asked in a roundabout way approximately the antique feud, Cheryl has always maintained her composure. She offers careful, thoughtful answers. She does no longer rehash old wounds, however she in no way sugarcoats the beyond both. Her silence, her calm refusal to engage speaks louder than any tabloid headline. In an enterprise wherein grudges are regularly was press excursions and scandals into sales pitches, Cheryl chose dignity. She walked far away from the chaos and she or he in no way looked again. Even nowadays, decades later, enthusiasts still wonder what exactly took place at the back of those studio partitions. Become it a simple personality conflict? Was it deeper, rooted in jealousy, fear, or unresolved ache? The overall story can also never be informed. Cheryl is not interested in settling rankings, and Kate has lengthily retreated from the public eye. However, what remains is the aftermath of a Cold War that by no means thawed. Inside the uncommon moments when she is asked approximately forgiveness, Cheryl speaks carefully. She believes in grace, in studying, in letting go. However, she additionally believes in protecting your peace and on foot far away from those who do not cost you. Ultimately, Cheryl Ladd did not want to fight lower back. She allowed her paintings and her silence say the whole lot. She carved out a long-a-hit profession while staying true to herself. And although she may additionally by no means say the phrases out loud, her moves made it clear forgiveness isn't continually required. Every now and then moving on manner walking away and never turning around.